Welcome, Ruth Watson. Ruth, how are we doing today?
Well, I'm fine now. I've managed to get my tech gremlins sorted out. It, it's always the fun bit about trying to do something like this. Kevin has talked me down from my fairly high pitched "Can he get it to work?" very sweary admission. So there you
Technology, eh? We do without it. So, obviously, it's been a while since we last spoke. I think the last time was in the election special show in May. But of course, you're fresh from your appearance on the TNT show special last night with John Drummond, which, folks, if you didn't catch it last night, certainly go onto the channel and pick it up. I highly recommend. So, in the show last night, Ruth, you described food sovereignty as placing the power of food production in the hands of growers, those who get the food to our tables, etc., and out of the hands of the large corporations. That sounds fantastic, but what does that journey actually look like?
go. I guess it means different things to different growers. If you've got a grower with tons and tons of strawberries every year, that's going to look very different to somebody that's got a local market garden. So I think that food resilience and has to be robust and dynamic and sort of suited to different structures. You're never going to feed a nation of people with folk just going to the market
Yeah.
in today's world. So you have to have, I think, sort of flexibility within the system. It's brilliant having the sort of 20-minute neighborhood greengrocer. But I guess in today's world, people want to have different ways of accessing food, and for a lot of people that's going to be supermarkets. But perhaps we need to change basically the kind of the monopoly really that the big supermarkets have now. It's not to say that supermarkets are the bad guys. I mean Tesco's, for example, started off at a street stall years, 100 or so years ago, and then got bigger, and they've done a very good job of bringing high quality produce to the tables
Yeah.
of many of us. But I think what that has to look like now is it is sort of changed, and in some ways, is the tail wagging the dog. And it's not okay for a supermarket to be able to crush the life and the profits out of the farming sector. And when you look at how much I mean, the average a family farm, I think, has got an average household income from farming of just over 26,000. That was the last figure that I saw. Um, £26,000 a year for working all day. That's not a lot. So a lot of farmers are very worried about the loss of EU subsidies because of Brexit, because
Sure.
actually it is the subsidy that keeps them going. And that's kind of, I'm not sure if I can say this, but it's kind of arse over tit. You know what I mean? Because it's not to put a fine farming phrase on it, because it's kind of, I mean, it's almost like we've done to food and drink what we've done to every other sector, which is the rich get richer and the rest of us subsidize the workers through universal credits and subsidies. And actually, I think that farmers should should get the reward for the work, and not perhaps the shareholders of the big supermarkets. So to me, that's kind of what it looks like, is just having a reset and having a think again.
So I guess, I mean, one of the most classic examples that probably springs to mind for most people is the very public affair of what happened to the dairy farmers. This really driving down the price to the rock bottom. They made it that, they were in effect working for nothing, but they had no choice but to do it. Their kind of hands were tied with regards to the opening of the supply chain on that. So, the supermarket business is obviously very cutthroat, and in Scotland, we don't really have our own supermarkets anymore. Is that really part of the challenge? Is that something we need to address? Is it even possible to address?
Well, I've had chats with the likes of Martin Kennedy from the National Farmers Union. He's now the president of the National Farmers Union, to talk about trying to replicate something along the lines of what we see happening in parts of Europe and across parts of America and in Australia, where supermarkets are owned almost as a cooperative by the
Mm,
farming community. Um, so you don't have to be a huge grower to be able to get your food on the shelves of the supermarket. So if, for example, my local Coopy, my co-op here, um, if there was an artisan goat cheese maker down the road, they would be able to have their produce on the shelf, and you would use barcodes to work out who gets paid what. Um, And he was quite skeptical that farmers would kind of ever work together in a way that wasn't going to be cutthroat and competitive. But I kind of think that we need to have a think that we need to try something. I mean, I've seen it happen in other communities in other countries, that the farmers, the farming community has teeth, and they get together and they put together supermarkets so you can go in and you buy your tin tomatoes and your toilet roll and your cleaning products, but the local produce is there on the supermarket shelves, and so you're cutting down food miles. You're supporting local. I mean, obviously, Scotland's never going to be able to grow, a large chunk of what the kind of things we like to eat. So we're still going to have imports, but I think that it does make sense to build resilience into the food chain. And the more that we're going to see with the HGV drivers, we do not have enough HGV drivers. I saw a letter from the chief of, I think it was a chief of police or chief superintendent, I can't remember, in Scotland a couple of years ago, and it was an open letter that he wrote, maybe the Police Federation. Anyway, it was an open letter that he had penned, and basically talking about how the police in Scotland needed more money from the Scottish government because they were going to be expected as part of their reciprocity, reciprocal agreement that they have among the nations, that they could well be expected to provide police escorts to food transportation vehicles, because
What?
with Brexit, they anticipated there being problems with food supply and food shortages. And I think that this is significant. I think we to have food resilience means keeping. Obviously, we want to be growing produce for export and getting that value, that value added product, and money coming in. The economy needs to have exports, but it makes sense to me that we produce local, and that we don't ship it across the UK just for it to come back bagged up in a load of plastic that it doesn't need.
And funny you should say that. I've been on a couple of meetings this week from various different people that mentioned the same thing, saying, all these images we've been seeing of the empty shelves in the supermarkets and stuff like that. Saying, well, I've been spending some time down in England and, some certain places in Wales, and they're saying it's not the same. They're not having these same issues. They're not seeing their supermarket shelves empty. And the idea behind that is, again, it seemed to be less business astute to send empty trucks up to Scotland and empty them out. So for the stores and areas that are more local to the distribution, key hubs are the places that are also getting facilitated, as you mentioned there. So that's also becoming a worry of people, because certainly, growing up, as a kid and things like that, you've seen these pictures of Soviet Russia, and that was the kind of norm, and almost people would joke about it, still do to some extent, that would be your kind of socialist lifespan and that. But now people are seeing that firsthand here as well. They realise that Brexit aspect isn't a scare story anymore. It's something they're witnessing firsthand, of more of the kind of essential projects not being available as what they've been used to in the past.
Yeah, and also you have to also look at there is a possibility that if I was in charge of food supply, then I would think perhaps it made sense to make sure that people in the large conurbations had, the places that are more likely to have large scale this unrest,
Yeah.
as this police officer was talking about. You're more likely to have the food in those places, and perhaps communities that are more outlying are perhaps not the primary focus. And you can understand why. If you're looking at questions of scale, well, if you've got a population of 7,000 that might go without, or a population of 500,000, you're going to feed the 500,000 first. So I think that the supermarkets like Lidl and Aldi that have traditionally maintain a short chain food supply, they tend to buy from local growers. And that's part of their business model. And that's one of the reasons why they're so good at keeping Scotland the brand, for example. Then you can see that's why those supermarkets have done better, have fared better, both with Brexit and with the COVID lockdowns.
I mean, certainly, sorry, apologies, just some of the origins, and again, correct me if I've got this wrong, but I understand that both Lidl and Aldi, when they were first setting up, they were deemed as such a threat to the established supermarket chains that were here, that they actually engaged with the suppliers to say, don't sell products to them anymore, or we'll cut business from you. And that basically forced the hand of them to say, like, we have to go and create, as everybody now well knows, that shops there, they've got their own variants. They're very similar brands to when established products, but it's their own kind, and to a very high standard of stuff. So although their hand was kind of forced, it actually became a successful business model for them to maintain, and also draws people back even at this stage down the line.
And I've had conversations with, I will not reveal which supermarkets, but I've had conversations with some of the buyers and some of the marketing agents that work at the headquarters with some of these supermarkets, and they are absolutely on the ball when it comes to making a virtue of their local provenance. I've had conversations with growers who say that they sometimes have to kind of say, no, hold on, kind of actually, some of the ingredients for this product haven't all come from Scotland.
Yeah.
So because the supermarkets are so keen to show that they support local, that they support Scottish farmers, they support Scottish food and drink producers, that they support the kind of harbour to home kind of ideology, that there absolutely is a recognition that there is a customer loyalty base there, and I think that we need to look at the whole aspect of what is it that we value. Why do we value local products? So Scotland Food and Drink have done a lot of research in this, and people in Scotland look at when they're asked what they think of as being local. They both think of their own area as being local, but they also think of any product produced anywhere in Scotland as being local. So we do have real potential for sort of getting perhaps Clyde tomatoes coming back. Some of the traditional areas where a lot of produce was made.
Traditionally,
But you know what? I mean, people didn't get tomatoes very often, and there was seasonality. So there's a number of things that we need to think about, both with the climate emergency, but also with Brexit forcing our hand.
absolutely.
And I think that the whole the Scottish government's initiative, which is sort of handled by the Soil Association, the Food for Life Served Here model, I think is extremely encouraging to see that the local councils have got a real opportunity to fulfill local procurement. So, for example, Mosgiel Farm, an organic farm, it does kind dairy, does kind. It really is quite an inspirational dairy farm, and they now have got the procurement contract to supply all of the school children in East Lanarkshire with organic milk in glass bottles.
Excellent.
And you've got Locavore in Glasgow, which has also got that deal, and they're now opening up in Edinburgh. You've got Shetland. I think it's 96% off the top of my head. I think it's 96% of their the produce that they have in their schools comes from local farms and producers. Now, this is possible, and the more that local councils support it, the more that people get thinking local, then the more opportunities there are. For example, for the wee CIC just down the road from me, the community enterprise shop, zero waste shops are popping up, and and the community garden. I'm so angry about food poverty, and I'm so worried about food insecurity that I've started a community garden in my area, and they take food and drink, they take stuff from us, and it's a way of us making sure that people in our area who don't have money but they do have time can come along and get fresh fruit and veg in return for their work.
Fantastic.
So there are lots of things that we can do. And if you talk to I think it's Andrew Whiteley of Keep Scotland the Bread, and he's talking about sort of the bakers on the 20th story in tower blocks, local bakeries taking off again, because why it is madness that we can buy a fluffed up brick from a producer down south that will last for 3 weeks and put that in front of our kids and think that that's a good thing, but actually all that bread is flour and water and a bit of yeast.
So Ruth, one of the key questions is obviously the the availability of junk food and as you just mentioned there, these kind of long shelf life products and stuff like that, are these a contributor to the obesity rates? I mean, is our current food supply, it's not a coincidence that we've got this stark rise in obesity over the last 10, 15, possibly 20 years of that. Is that part of the story? Because certainly I know from my own experience of trying to buy organic products that they're on a kind of regularity, they're far more expensive than the more traditional option that might be available for this. So do you see that as being a key marked, certainly not a coincidence from your perspective?
I think there's a number of issues happening there, and one of them is the way that shops sort of stick an extra few pence on if something's organic. Now that may well be because the organic product isn't packed full of isn't packed full of sort of stabilizers and preservatives, so it may not have as long a shelf life. But one of the things that's interesting with the local procurement that is happening with local councils is that they are able to get these the organic produce on the tables, and it's cost neutral. It's possible. The amazing people. Oh my goodness, my brain! I've got total brain fog at the moment. Heather Anderson, Whip Me Organics. Whip Me Organics. They showed that the schools and the old folks' homes could get organic, fresh produce from a local farm, and it was a cost neutral benefit. So it's not even a little. You're not having to pay extra for that. It's just you can do that, but it's down to marketing choices as well. So I think that we have to have a really serious thing. I mean, in the old days, if in the old days it was cheaper to buy tatties and some carrots and make yourself a pot of soup and have some bread than it was to buy a packet of biscuits. And now, and I've got a pal who, because of COVID, she and her husband, they're musicians, and they've been really struggling because they haven't been able to earn a living. And she has been helping out at the local food hub and food bank. Now, it is an obscenity that we need food hubs in a country as rich as ours, but thank goodness for them, given the current circumstances and the Westminster's policies of supporting people. And she says that she has gained a huge amount of weight because of the food that she has been eating, which is high carb, quite processed carbs. But again, if you speak to the folk at Scotland the Bread, they're very keen to see the traditional grains being used, which are higher in protein and better for you. So it's better for your bank balance and your belt, as they say. And that's because you feel fuller on less, or you feel more full on less product. So it's not just the cost of the carbs that we're eating, or the produce that we're eating. It's the quality of it, and our brains are rigged up so that if you were to try eating like a pound of sugar, or a lump of a pound of butter, or any one of those things separately, your brain would kind of stop and go, no. But our brains haven't yet caught up with our ability to bake. And so when the products are combined, our brain doesn't realize how much it is consuming. So the hunger isn't satiated as soon. So that's one of the reasons why often people at the lower end of the price bracket with food and drink do suffer obesity issues, and a large part of it is because it's such highly processed food. The bread in our supermarkets, the European Union at one point, and I think they're still thinking about it, was talking about making the bread producers, the supermarkets and the big bread makers, putting on their labels a bread-like substance, because it is so far, the modern bread that we eat is so far from being real bread and having the real process of the yeasts working. So yeah, we have to have a real hard look at the kind of food we're putting on our plates.
So just on that, I'm conscious we're running out of time. I know we could chat all day about this. We'll get some questions coming in from people in the room. We've got from N. Gillespie. It's about a double barrel question there. The first part was really about, has the pandemic made people more aware of their food and drink, where it comes from, and how it supports local jobs and reducing carbon, etc. But more prominently, the part I was wanting to cover is the barrier to healthy food for all is cost, in effect. I mean, I know you've mentioned that to some extent, but going back to the fact that if you just can't afford, then you've got no choice but to eat the unhealthy foods like the ones you just mentioned there. I mean, that is the lay of the land. Yep.
I think that the pandemic definitely. I did a column for I do a regular comment for the Farming Scotland magazine, and they one of the things that I did was looking at to local food veg boxes and butchers boxes. Now the butchers actually kept the grannies up the glens going with giving them deliveries of like sort of a soup box of their meat and their tatties and the other things. And definitely the many farm shops and the kind of producers, farmers that do the veg box schemes notice that people were supporting local and getting local and increased their deliveries and really went out their way. I mean, getting in extra staff, working extra hours to make sure that everyone in their community was fed that was ordering these veg boxes. But what was quite devastating was how many of them reported once the pandemic was over, people going, okay, thanks, we don't need you anymore, and then going back to and actually the veg boxes often are cheaper, but people don't realize that. So it's often cheaper to get a fruit and veg box delivered to your house with local stuff. And part of the reason it's cheaper is because you're not going into the shops and you're not seeing what else there is to, you sort of go in to buy a pint of milk and come out with a bag of stuff.
Or a canoe if it's that'll do a little.
Exactly. But when you need it every day. But it's but no, I think that we have to have a really serious look at what food poverty isn't just about not having enough food on your plate. It's about not having good food on your plate. And a large part of that problem is that it is fueled by fuel poverty. Because it's all I mean, I know somebody who was at a food bank and they said that one of the guys came in and said, I didn't like that pasta, it was too crunchy, because he didn't know how to cook pasta. He didn't know that you did cook pasta. And anyway, he couldn't cook the pasta because he didn't have any fuel. So we've got a number of really serious things that we need to address in terms of food security. But I think that there's a number of ways that we can tackle that.
So on that, obviously we'll pretty much run out of time. So Ruth, just a reminder, obviously, they can find more information at keepscotlandthebrand.scot. Find out more about the campaign, what you guys are working on, the hard work and that I know that you personally are always on working there. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for the question. Apologies that we couldn't run a bit more. I've certainly got more questions I'd like to throw Ruth's way, and I'll certainly